Hello, hello. Good evening. Hi, Core. Good to see you. Ah, more like man of the half hour. But hello. It's funny. I hit the go live button and I found myself to be very, very tired. So, I can finally deliver upon nice, EP reading. Ugh, what a day today. The good news is, I'm no longer feeling that sick, and my appetite is back. So, I've started to eat food again, and that is nice. I like food. Like, I had a cup of noodles, and then after that, I suddenly felt extremely ravenous. Like I desperately wanted to eat something. Unfortunately, I had to wait. I mean, I was still trying to eat before, but like, food itself kinda sickened me after what happened on Monday to me. Yeah, I'm glad things are getting better. It's always a nice thing. What happened on Monday? So, after my failed attempts at streaming, we had an anime night in the Discord, and I was hungry. So I bought Wendy's. Were you there for that? You were in the chat, but you didn't join the Discord afterwards. Yeah, I got Wendy's, and it tasted good at first, but then everything started to go horribly, horribly wrong after that point. It was so bad that I couldn't really get any sleep, and I had to call out of work. Luckily, my boss was okay with it, so she's just like, yep, nope, don't come in. See you when you're better. We don't need to talk about that. And worse. And worse. Anyways, things are better now. And I did get plenty of rest yesterday. And today was work as normal. I know, Core. But the situation has mostly passed, but you know, sometimes that's kinda gross considering that not even like 5 minutes has passed. It's going live. And that's the first thing people are gonna hear? We have VOD watchers, you know. Hi, Lychee. Good to see you. You like gross? Well, that's like why you like me then, huh? Anyways, self-deprecation aside. So yeah. How are you doing, Lychee? Hello, Jam Jam. Am I feeling any better today? Yeah. As I was talking about a bit ago, I managed to get my appetite back. Thank you, Jam Jam. So, I think things are definitely getting better. It was something that was only going to last like a few days at most, but I'm just glad I can eat again. But now, while I am nice, tired, and heapy, it's time to begin our reading. You're doing well? You got some work done? That's wonderful, Lychee. I'm glad to hear. Alright. Go ahead and get nice, comfy, and cozy. As we'll be starting off with The Pawn of Prophecy, Chapter 13. Glasses on. Story time pipe is out. I'm glad to. And here we go. Chapter 13. The palace of King Anheg of Cherek was a vast, brooding structure near the center of Valalorn. Huge wings, many of them crumbled into decay, with unpaned windows staring emptily at the open sky through collapsed roofs, stretched out from the main building in all directions. So far as Garion could tell, there was no plan to the palace whatsoever. It had, it seemed, merely grown over the 3,000 years and more that the kings of Cherek had ruled there. Why is so much of it empty and broken down like that? He asked Barak as their sled rolled into the snow-packed courtyard. What some kings build, other kings let fall down, Barak said shortly. It's the way of kings. Barak's mood had been black since their encounter with the blind woman at the temple. The others had all dismounted and stood waiting. You've been away from home too long if you can get lost on the way from the harbor to the palace, Silk said pleasantly. We were delayed, Barak grunted. A broad, iron-bound door at the top of the wide steps that led up to the palace opened then, as if someone behind it had been waiting for them all to arrive. Welcome back, Cor. No need to apologize. Sometimes we all have to get up for whatever reason. A woman with long flaxen braids and wearing a deep scarlet cloak trimmed with rich fur stepped out onto the portico at the top of the stairs and stood looking down at them. Greetings, Lord Barak, Earl of Trelheim and husband, she said formally. Barak's face grew even more somber. Merrill, he acknowledged with a curt nod. King Anheg granted me permission to greet you, my lord, Barak's wife said, as is my right and my duty. I should make a lick emote. Oh, that would be funny. You've always been most attentive to your duties, Merrill, Barak said. Where are my daughters? At Trelheim, my lord, she said. I didn't think it would be a good idea for them to travel so far in the cold. There was a faintly malicious note in her voice. Oh, there's the lick emote. I'm sure Jam Jam would love that. Oh, I agree. Barak sighed. I see, he said. Oh, those are funny looking. Was I in error, my lord? Merrill asked. Let it pass, Barak said. If you and your friends are ready, my lord, she said, I'll escort you to the throne room. Barak went up the stairs, briefly and rather formally embraced his wife, and the two of them went through the wide doorway. Tragic, the Earl of Selene murmured, shaking his head as they all went up the stairs to the palace door. Hardly that, Silk said. After all, Barak got what he wanted, didn't he? You're a cruel man, Prince Keldar, the Earl said. Not really, Silk said. I'm a realist, that's all. Barak spent all those years yearning after Merrill, and now he's got her. I'm delighted to see such steadfastness rewarded, aren't you? The Earl of Selene sighed. A party of mailed warriors joined them and escorted them through a maze of corridors, up broad stairs and down narrow ones, deeper and deeper into the vast pile. I've always admired Shrek architecture, Silk said sardonically. It's so unanticipated. Expanding the palace gives a weak king something to do, King Fulrek observed. It's not a bad idea, really. In Sandaria, bad kings usually devote their time to street paving projects, but all of Alalorn was paved thousands of years ago. Sardonically. The meaning of sardonically means in a way that is characterized by bitter or scornful derision, or mockingly. And that is your definition for today. Hooray for new words. You're welcome. Silk laughed. It's always been a problem, Your Majesty, he said. How do you keep bad kings out of mischief? Prince Keldar, King Fulrek said, I don't wish your uncle any misfortune, but I think it might be very interesting if the crown of Drasnia just happened to fall to you. Please, Your Majesty, Silk said with feigned shock. Don't even suggest that. Also a wife, the Earl of Selene said slyly. The prince definitely needs a wife. That's even worse, Silk said with a shudder. That's right, Cor. A very fancy word, or rude. The throne room of King Anheg was a vaulted chamber with a great fire pit in the center where whole logs blazed and crackled. Unlike the lushly draped hall of King Fulrek, the stone walls here were bare, and torches flared and smoked in iron rings sunk in stone. The men who lounged near the fire were not the elegant courtiers of Fulrek's court, but rather were bearded Churek warriors gleaming in chainmail. At one end of the room sat 5 thrones, each surmounted by a banner. 4 of the thrones were occupied, and 3 regal-looking women stood talking nearby. King Fulrek, King of Sandaria, one of the warriors who had escorted them boomed, striking the butt of his spear hollowly on the rush-strewn floor. Hail, Fulrek, a large black-bearded man on one of the thrones called, rising to his feet. His long blue robe was wrinkled and spotted. His hair was shaggy and unkempt. The gold crown he wore was dented in a place or two, and one of its points had been broken off. Hail, Anheg, the king of the Sendars replied, bowing slightly. Thy throne awaits thee, my dear Fulrek, the shaggy-haired man said, indicating the banner of Sandaria behind the one vacant throne. The kings of Eloria welcome the wisdom of the king of Sandaria at this council. Arian found the stilted, archaic form of address strangely impressive. Which king is which, friend Silk? Drinick whispered as they approached the thrones. The fat one in the red robe with the reindeer on his banner is my uncle, Rodar of Drasnia. The lean-faced one in black under the horse banner is Chohag of Algaria. The big grim-faced one in gray with no crown who sits beneath the sword banner is Brand, the Riven Warder. Brand? Arian interrupted, startled as he remembered the stories of the Battle of Vomimbre. All Riven warders are named Brand, Silk explained. King Fulrek greeted each of the other kings in the formal language that seemed to be customary, and then he took his place beneath the green banner with the golden sheaf of wheat that was emblem of Zandaria. "Hail Belgarath, disciple of Alder," Anheg said, "and hail Lady Pulgara, honored daughter of immortal Belgarath." "There's little time for all this ceremony, Anheg," Mr. Wolf said tartly, throwing back his cloak and striding forward. "Why have the kings of Eloria summoned me?" "Permit us our little ceremonies, Ancient One," Rodar, the grossly fat king of Drasnia, said slyly. "We so seldom have the chance to play king. We won't be much longer at it." Mr. Wolf shook his head in disgust. One of the three regal-looking women came forward then. She was a tall, raven-haired beauty in an elaborately cross-tied black velvet gown. She curtsied to King Fulrek and touched her cheek briefly to his. "Your Majesty," she said, "your presence honors our home." "Your Highness," Fulrek replied, inclining his head respectfully. "Queen Islena," Silk murmured to Dernick and Garion, Anheg's wife. The little man's nose twitched with suppressed mirth. "Watch her when she greets Bulgara." The queen turned and curtsied deeply to Mr. Wolf. "Divine Belgarath," she said, her rich voice throbbing with respect. "Hardly divine, Islena," the old man said dryly. "Immortal son of Alder," she swept on, ignoring the interruption. "Mighty sorcerer in all the world, my poor house trembles at the awesome power you bring within its walls." "A pretty speech, Islena," Wolf said. "A little inaccurate, but pretty all the same." The queen had already turned to Aunt Pole. "Ah, you got me. I bumped the pole. Just a little." Alright, I'll stop poking it now. But the queen had already turned to Aunt Pole. "Glorious sister," she intoned. "Sister?" Garion was startled. "She's a mystic," Silk said softly. "She dabbles a bit in magic and thinks of herself a sorceress. Watch." With an elaborate gesture, the queen produced a green jewel and presented it to Aunt Pole. "She had it up her sleeve," Silk whispered gleefully. "A royal gift, Islena," Aunt Pole said in a strange voice. "A pity that I can only offer this in return." She handed the queen a single deep red rose. "Where did she get that?" Garion asked in amazement. Silk winked at him. The queen looked at the rose doubtfully and cupped it between her two hands. She examined it closely, and her eyes widened. The color drained out of her face, and her hands began to tremble. The second queen had stepped forward. She was a tiny blonde with a beautiful smile. Without ceremony, she kissed King Fulrek and then Mr. Wolf and embraced Aunt Pole warmly. Her affection seemed simple and unself-conscious. "Reen, Queen of Drasnia," Silk said, and his voice had an odd note to it. Garion glanced at him and saw the faintest hint of a bitter, self-mocking expression flicker across his face. Sounds like someone you know? I wonder who that could be. In that single instant, as clearly as if it had suddenly been illuminated by a bright light, Garion saw the reason for Silk's sometimes strange manner. An almost suffocating urge of sympathy welled up in his throat. The third queen, Sylar of Algaria, greeted King Fulrek, Mr. Wolf, and Aunt Pole with a few brief words in a quiet voice. "Is the Riven Warder unmarried?" Vernick asked, looking around for another queen. "He had a wife," Silk said shortly, his eyes still on Queen Porine. "But she died some years ago. She left him 4 sons. "Ah," Vernick said. Then Barak, grim-faced and obviously angry, entered the hall and strode to King Anheg's throne. "Welcome home, cousin," King Anheg said. "I thought perhaps you'd lost your way." "Hello, Colty." "Welcome in. How are you doing tonight?" "Family business, Anheg," Barak said. "I had to have a few words with my wife." "I see," Anheg said, and let it drop. "Have you met our friends?" Barak asked. Very eepy. Me too, honestly. So, hopefully this will be good for both of us. We all love a bedtime story before bed. "Not as yet, Lord Barak," King Rohadar said. "We were involved with the customary formalities." He chuckled, and his great paunch jiggled. "I'm sure you all know the Earl of Selene," Barak said. "And this is Durnick, a smith and a brave man. The boy's name is Garion. He's in Lady Polgar's care. A good lad." "Eepy night it is. "Do you suppose we could get on with this?" Mr. Wolf asked impatiently. Chohag, king of the Algars, spoke in a strangely soft voice. "Art thou aware, Belgarath, of the misfortune which hath befallen us? We turn to thee for counsel." "Chohag," Wolf said testily, "you sound like a bad Orendish epic. Is all this thing and thouing really necessary?" Chohag looked embarrassed and glanced at King Anheg. By the oop. What happened? Yeah? 'Cause it's like, why are you doing this? I was just like, oh. Chohag looked embarrassed and glanced at Anheg. "My fault, Belgarath," Anheg said ruefully. "I set scribes to record our meetings. Chohag was speaking to history, as well as to you." His crown had slipped a bit and perched precariously over one ear. "History's very tolerant, Anheg," Wolf said. "You don't have to try to impress her. She'll forget most of what we say anyway." He turned to the Riven Warder. "Brand," he said, "do you suppose you could explain all this without too much embellishment?" "I'm afraid it's my fault, Belgarath," the gray-robed warder said in a deep voice. "The apostate was able to carry off his theft because of my laxity." "The thing's supposed to protect itself, Brand," Wolf told him. "I can't even touch it." "I know the thief, and there's no way you could have kept him out of Riva. What concerns me is how he was able to lay hands on it without being destroyed by its power." Rand spread his hands helplessly. We woke one morning, and it was gone. The priests were only able to divine the name of the thief. The spirit of the bear god wouldn't say any more. Since we knew who he was, we were careful not to speak his name or the name of the thing that he took. Good, Wolf said. He has a way to pick words out of the air at great distances. I taught him how to do that myself. Rand nodded. We knew that, he said. It made phrasing our message to you difficult. You didn't come to Riva, and my messenger didn't return. I thought something had gone wrong. That's when we sent men out to find you. Mr. Wolf scratched at his beard. I guess it's my own fault that I'm here then, he said. I borrowed your messenger. I had to get word to some people in Orendia. I suppose I should have known better. Sil cleared his throat. May I speak? He asked politely. Certainly, Prince Keldar, King Anheg said. Is it entirely prudent to continue these discussions in public? Silk asked. The Murgos have enough gold to buy ears in many places, and the arts of the Grollems can lift the thoughts out of the minds of even the most loyal warriors. What isn't known can't be revealed, if you take my meaning. The warriors of Anheg aren't so easily bought, Silk, Orak said testily. And there aren't any Grollems in Shrek. Sounds like a fluffy beard. It gets by. Are you also confident about the serving men and the kitchen wenches? Silk suggested. And I found Grollems in some very unexpected places. There's something in what my nephew says, King Rodar said, his face thoughtful. Dresdia has centuries of experience in gathering information. And Keldar is one of our best. If he thinks that our words might go farther than we'd want them, it might be wise to listen to him. It gets by. Thank you, Uncle, Silk said, bowing. Could you penetrate this palace, Prince Keldar? King Anheg challenged. I already have, Your Majesty, Silk said modestly, 12 times or more. Anheg looked at Rodar with one raised eyebrow. Rodar coughed slightly. It was some time ago, Anheg. Nothing serious. I was just curious about something. That's all. All you had to do was ask, Anheg said in a slightly injured tone. I didn't want to bother you, Rodar said with a shrug. Besides, it's more fun to do it the other way. With a king like that, you can tell. It's a country of thieves. Thieves and spies. All of them. Friends, King Volrax said, the issue before us is too important to chance compromising it. Wouldn't it be better to be overcautious rather than take any risks? King Anheg frowned and then shrugged. Whatever you wish, he said. We'll continue in private then. Cousin, would you clear old King Eldric's hall for us and set guards in the hallways near it? I will, Anheg, Vorax said. He took 12 warriors and left the hall. The kings rose from their thrones, all except Chohag, a lean warrior, very nearly as tall as Borak, and with a shaved head and flowing scalp lock of the Algars, stepped forward and helped him up. Arian looked inquiringly at Silk. An illness when he was a child, Silk explained softly. It left his legs so weak that he can't stand unaided. Doesn't that make it kind of hard for him to be king? Arian asked. Algar spend more time sitting on horses than they do on their feet, Silk said. Once he's on a horse, Chohag's the equal of any man. In Algaria, The warrior who's helping him is Hetar, his adopted son. You know him? Garion asked. I know everyone, Garion. Silk laughed softly. Hetar and I have met a few times. I like him, though I'd rather he didn't know that. Queen Porine came over to where they stood. Islena's taking Sylar and me to her private quarters, she said to Silk. Apparently, women aren't supposed to be involved in matters of state here in Chirek. Our direct cousins have a few blind spots, Your Highness, Silk said. There are conservatives, of course, and it hasn't occurred to them yet that women are human. Queen Porine winked at him with a sly little grin. I'd hoped that we might get a chance to talk, Keldar, but it doesn't look like it now. Did you get my message to Layla? Silk nodded. She said she'd write to you immediately, he said. If we'd known you were going to be here, I could have carried her letter myself. It was Islena's idea, she said. She decided that it might be nice to have a council of queens while the kings were meeting. She'd have invited Layla too, but everyone knows how terrified she is of sea travel. Has your council produced anything momentous, Highness? Silk asked slyly. Queen Porine made a face. We sit around and watch Islena do tricks, disappearing coins, things up her sleeves, that kind of thing, she said. Or she tells fortunes. Sylar's too polite to object, and I'm the youngest, so I'm not supposed to say too much. It's terribly dull, particularly when she goes into trances over that stupid crystal ball of hers. Did Layla think she could help me? If anyone can, Silk assured her. I should warn you, though, that her advice is likely to be quite explicit. Queen Layla's an earthy little soul, and sometimes very blunt. Queen Porine giggled wickedly. That's all right. I'm a grown woman, after all. Of course, Silk said. I just wanted to prepare you, that's all. Are you making fun of me, Keldar? She asked. Would I do that, Your Highness? Silk asked, his face full of innocence. I think you would, she said. Coming, Porine? Queen Islena asked from not far away. At once, Your Highness, the Queen of Dresnia said. Her fingers flicked briefly at Silk. What a bore. Patience, Highness, Silk gestured in reply. Queen Porine docilely followed the stately Queen of Chirek and the silent Queen of Algaria from the hall. Silk's eyes followed her, and his face had that same self-mocking expression as before. The others are leaving, Garion said delicately, and pointed to the far end of the hall where the Alorn kings were just going out the door. All right, Silk said, and led the way quickly after them. Garion stayed at the rear of the group as they all made their way through the drafty corridors toward King Eldric's hall. The dry voice in his mind told him that if Aunt Pole saw him, she'd probably find a reason to send him away. As he loitered along at the rear of the procession, a furtive movement flickered briefly far down one of the side corridors. He caught only one glimpse of a man, an ordinary-looking Chirek warrior, wearing a dark green cloak. And then they had moved past that corridor. Garion stopped and stepped back to look again, but the man in the green cloak was gone. At the door to King Eldric's hall, Aunt Pole stood, waiting with her arms crossed. Where have you been? She asked. I was just looking, he said as innocently as possible. I see, she said. Then she turned to Barak. The council's probably going to last for a long time, she said, and Garion's just going to get restless before it's over. Is there some place where he can amuse himself until supper time? Aunt Pole, Garion protested. The armory, perhaps? Barak suggested. What would I do in an armory? Garion demanded. Would you prefer the scullery? Aunt Pole asked pointedly. On second thought, I think I might like to see the armory. Hi, Natalia. Welcome in. Good to see you. How have you been? It's been a while, hasn't it? On second thought, I think I might like to see the armory. I thought you might. It's at the far end of this corridor, Garion, Barak said. The room with the red door. Run along, dear, Aunt Pole said, and try not to cut yourself on anything. Garion sulked slowly down the corridor Barak had pointed out to him, keenly feeling the injustice of the situation. The guards posted in the passageway outside King Eldric's hall even made eavesdropping impossible. Garion sighed and continued his solitary way toward the armory. The other part of his mind was busy, however, mulling over certain problems. Despite his stubborn refusal to accept the possibility that Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole were indeed Belgarath and Bulgara, the behavior of the Alorn kings made it obvious that they at least did believe it. And he's like, on second thought. Then there was the question of the rose Aunt Pole had given to Queen Islena. Setting aside the fact that roses do not bloom in the winter, how had Aunt Pole known that Islena would present her with that green jewel and therefore prepared the rose in advance? He deliberately avoided the idea that his aunt had simply created the rose on the spot. The corridor along which he passed, deep in thought, was dim, with only a few torches set in rings on the walls to light the way. Side passages branched out from it here and there, gloomy, unlighted openings that stretched back into the darkness. He had almost reached the armory when he heard a faint sound in one of those dark passages. Without knowing exactly why, he drew back into one of the other openings and waited. The man in the green cloak stepped out into the lighted corridor and looked around furtively. He was an ordinary-looking man with a short, sandy beard, and probably could have walked anywhere in the palace without attracting much notice. His manner, however, and his stealthy movements cried out louder than words that he was doing something he was not supposed to be doing. He hurried up the corridor in the direction from which Garion had come, and Garion shrank back into the protective darkness of his hiding place. When he carefully poked his head out into the corridor again, the man had disappeared, and it was impossible to know down which of those dark side passageways he had gone. Garion's inner voice told him that even if he told anyone about this, they wouldn't listen. He'd need more than just an uneasy feeling of suspicion to report if he didn't want to appear foolish. All he could do for the time being was to keep his eyes open for the man in the green cloak. And that right there is the end of chapter 13. Man, we sure met a lot of characters this time, didn't we? Anyways. Do I feel like switching books? No, I don't. We love pop cats around here. So, I'm just gonna go ahead and keep going with chapter 14. It was snowing the following morning, and Aunt Pole, Silk, Barak, and Mr. Wolf again met for counsel with the kings, leaving Garion in Dernick's keeping. The two sat near the fire in the huge hall with the thrones, watching the 24 or so bearded Trek warriors and lounged about or engaged in various activities to pass the time. Some of them sharpened their swords or polished their armor. Others ate or sat drinking, even though it was still quite early in the morning. Several were engaged in a heated dice game, and some simply sat with their backs against the wall and slept. These Chereks seem to be a very idle people, Dernick said quietly to Garion. I haven't seen anyone actually working since we arrived. Have you? Garion shook his head. I think these are the king's own warriors, he said just as quietly. I don't think they're supposed to do anything, except sit around and wait for the king to tell them to fight someone. Dernick frowned disapprovingly. It must be a terribly boring way to live, he said. Dernick, Garion asked after a moment, did you notice the way Barak and his wife acted toward each other? It's very sad, Dernick said. Silk told me about it yesterday. Barak fell in love with her when they were both very young, but she was highborn and didn't take him very seriously. How does it happen that they're married then? Garion asked. It was her family's idea, Beric explained. After Barak came the Earl of Trelheim. They decided that a marriage would give them a valuable connection. Meryl objected, but it didn't do her any good. Silk said Barak found out, after they were married, that she's really a very shallow person. But of course, it was too late by then. She does spiteful things to try to hurt him, and he spends as much time away from home as possible. Do they have any children? Garion asked. 2, Dernick said. Both girls, about 5 and 7. Barak loves them very much, but he doesn't get to see them very often. Garion sighed. I wish there was something we could do, he said. Wife. What a comment. We can't interfere between a man and his wife, Dernick said. Things like that just aren't done. Did you know that Silk's in love with his aunt? Garion said without stopping to think. It's true. We'll get there. Garion! Dernick's voice was shocked. That's an unseemly thing to say. It's true all the same, Garion said defensively. Of course, she's not really his aunt, I guess. She's his uncle's second wife. It's not exactly like she was his real aunt. One moment, I'm gonna drink water. Oh no, I saw they get captured on the microphone. The gulp. Whoops. She's married to his uncle, Dernick said firmly. Who made up this scandalous story? You barely heard it good. Nobody made it up, Garion said. I was watching his face when he talked to her yesterday. It's pretty plain the way he feels about her. I'm sure you just imagined it, Dernick said disapprovingly. He stood up. Let's look around. That'll give us something better to do than sit here gossiping about our friends. Hello there, Chuckalope. Welcome in, and good evening. How you doing? It's not really the sort of thing decent men do. All right, Garion agreed quickly, a little embarrassed. He stood up and followed Dernick across the smoky hall and out into the corridor. You're doing good? That's wonderful, Chuckalope. What brand of water is that? How about you go ahead and take a guess, Core? You get 3 tries. What brand of water am I drinking from this bottle? I swallow loud. Nickel water? Absolutely not. Strike one. Hey, Chuckalope. Thanks for the follow. Deer Park? Mm-mm. Strike two. Your final guess, Core, before we get back to the book. There you go. Here comes the final guess. Can you guess from which store, though? You're close. You're very close. All right, Garion agreed quickly. A little embarrassed, he stood up and followed Dernick across the smoky hall and out into the corridor. Publix incorrect. I am drinking from a great value water bottle from Sam's Club. Ta-da! Let's have a look at the kitchen, Garion suggested. And the smithy, too, Dernick said. The royal kitchens were enormous. Entire oxen roasted on spits, and whole flocks of geese simmered in lakes of gravy. Stews bubbled in cart-sized cauldrons, and battalions of loaves were marched into ovens big enough to stand in. Yeah, Sam's Club. I mean, Sam's Club and Walmart are, you know, cousins. They're related. So of course they're going to sell some of the same things. Unlike Aunt Pole's well-ordered kitchen at Falder's farm, everything here was chaos and confusion. The head cook was a huge man with a red face who screamed orders which everyone ignored. There were shouts and threats and a great deal of horseplay. A spoon heated in a fire and left where an unsuspecting cook would pick it up brought shrieks of mirth, and one man's hat was stolen and deliberately thrown into a seething pot of stew. Let's go someplace else, Dernick, Garion said. This isn't what I expected at all. Dernick nodded. Mistress Pole would never tolerate all this foolishness, he agreed disapprovingly. In the hallway outside the kitchen, a maid with reddish blonde hair and a pale green dress cut quite low at the bodice loitered. Excuse me, Dernick said to her politely. Could you direct us to the smithy? She looked him up and down boldly. Are you new here? She asked. I haven't seen you before. We're just visiting, Dernick said. Where are you from? She demanded. Sandaria, Dernick said. How interesting. Perhaps the boy could run this errand for you, and you and I could talk for a while. Her look was direct. Ernest coughed and his ears reddened. "The smithy?" he asked again. The maid laughed lightly. "In the courtyard at the end of this corridor," she said. "I'm usually around here someplace. I'm sure you can find me when you finish your business with the smith." "Yes," Dernick said. "I'm sure I could. Come along, Garion." They went on down the corridor and out into a snowy inner courtyard. "Outrageous!" Dernick said stiffly, his ears still flaming. "The girl has no sense of propriety whatsoever. I'd report her if I knew to whom." "Shocking," Garion agreed, secretly amused by Dernick's embarrassment. Yeah, she was. Saying, "Hey, let the kid go and you and me, we could, get to know each other." And Dernick said, They crossed the courtyard through the lightly sifting snow. The smithy was presided over by a huge black-bearded man with forearms as big as Garion's thighs. Dernick introduced himself, and the two soon happily were talking shop to the accompaniment of the ringing blows of the smith's hammer. Garion noticed that instead of plows, spades, and hoes that would fill a Sindarian smithy, the walls were hung with swords, spears, and war axes. Ah, that's your type, I see. At one forge, an apprentice was hammering out arrowheads, and at another, a lean, one-eyed man was working on an evil-looking dagger. Dernick and the smith talked together for most of the remainder of the morning, while Garion wandered about the inner courtyard, watching the various workmen at their tasks. There were coopers and wheelwrights, cobblers and carpenters, saddlers and candle makers, all busily at work to maintain the huge household of King Anhag. As he watched, Garion also kept his eyes open for the sandy-bearded man in the green cloak he'd seen the night before. It was unlikely that the man would be here where honest work was being done, but Garion stayed alert all the same. About noon, Barak came looking for them and led them back to the great hall where Silk lounged, intently watching a dice game. Candle making sounds like the most peaceful job, yeah. A little smelly sometimes, what with the wax and everything, but you make candles. You could even say. It's lit. Otter. Anhag and the others want to meet privately this afternoon, Barak said. I've got an errand to run, and I thought you might want to go along. Icor. Hello there, shattered portraits. Good evening and welcome in. Hope you're having a good night tonight. That might not be a bad idea, Silk said, tearing his eyes away from the game. Your cousin's warriors dice badly, and I'm tempted to try a few rolls with them. It'd probably be better if I didn't. Most men take offense at losing to strangers. Barak grinned. I'm sure they'd be glad to let you play, Silk, he said. They've got just as much a chance of winning as you do. Just as the sun has as much chance of coming up in the west as in the east, Silk said. Are you that sure of your skill, friend Silk? Dernick asked. I'm sure of theirs, Silk chuckled. He jumped up. Let's go, he said. My fingers are starting to itch. Let's get them away from temptation. Ah, that's a sweet compliment from Cora there. Saying they like your name. Anything you say, Prince Keldar, Barak laughed. They all put on fur cloaks and left the palace. The snow had almost stopped, and the wind was brisk. I'm a bit confused by all these names, Dernick said, as they trudged toward the central part of Valalorn. I've been meaning to ask about it. You, friend Silk, are also Prince Keldar, and sometimes the merchant Ambar of Kotu, and Mr. Wolf is called Belgarath, and Mistress Pole is also Lady Pulgara or the Duchess of Arat. Where I come from, people usually have only one name. Names are like clothes, Dernick, Silk explained. We put on what's most suitable for the occasion. Honest men have little need to wear strange clothes or strange names. Those of us who aren't so honest, however, occasionally have to change one or the other. I don't find it amusing to hear Mistress Pole described as not being honest, Dernick said stiffly. No disrespect intended, Silk assured him. Simple definitions don't apply to Lady Pulgara. And when I say that we're not honest, I simply mean that this business we're in sometimes requires us to conceal ourselves from people who are evil as well as devious. Or sometimes we just like to protect our other identities that we have secretly. You'll never know the other account name. Dernick looked unconvinced, but let it pass. Let's take this street, Barak suggested. I don't want to pass the Temple of Belar today. Why? Garion asked. I'm a little behind in my religious duties, Barak said with a pained look, and I'd rather not be reminded of it by the High Priest of Belar. His voice is very penetrating, and I don't like being called down in front of the whole city. A prudent man doesn't give either a priest or a woman the opportunity to scold him in public. I only have to wonder why that part is highlighted in the Kindle ebook. Weird. The streets of Valalorn were narrow and crooked, and the ancient stone houses were tall and narrow with overhanging second stories. Despite the intermittent snow and the crisp wind, the streets seemed full of people, most of them garbed in furs against the chill. There was much good-humored shouting and exchange of body insults. Two elderly and dignified men were pelting each other with snowballs in the middle of one street to the raucous encouragement of the bystanders. They're old friends, Barak said with a broad grin. They do this every day all winter long. Pretty soon they'll go to an alehouse and get drunk and sing old songs together until they fall off their benches. They've been doing it for years now. What do they do in the summer? Silk asked. They throw rocks, Barak said. The drinking and singing and falling off the benches stays the same, though. Damn, what a friendship. Hello, Barak, a green-eyed young woman called from an upper window. When are you coming to see me again? Barak glanced up, and his face flushed, but he didn't answer. That lady's talking to you, Barak, Garion said. I heard her, Barak replied shortly. She seems to know you, Silk said with a sly look. She knows everyone, Barak said, flushing even more. Shall we move along? How's my voice so relaxing? That's a very good question. It just sort of worked out that way. I'm glad you're enjoying it, though. And hopefully it'll help you relax some more. Around another corner, a group of men dressed in shaggy furs shuffled along in single file. Their gait was a kind of curious swaying from side to side, and people quickly made way for them. Hail, Lord Barak, their leader intoned. Hail, Lord Barak, the others said in unison, still swaying. Barak bowed stiffly. May the arm of Belar protect thee, the leader said. All praise to Belar, bear god of Eloria, the other said. Barak bowed again and stood until the procession had passed. Who were they? Bernick asked. Bear cultists, Barak said with distaste. Religious fanatics. Just wait till I drop the boyfriend ASMR. You want to know something funny? I actually started scripting that. And then we get to use the nice microphone and have that be just a nice recorded video for all of you to play over and over. A troublesome group, Silk explained. They have chapters in all the Aloran kingdoms. They're excellent warriors, but they're instruments of the High Priest of Belar. Hi, Nat. They spend their time in rituals, military training, and interfering in local politics. Where's this Eloria they spoke of? Garion asked. All around us, Barak said with a broad gesture. Eloria used to be all the Aloran kingdoms together. They were all one nation. The cultists want to reunite them. That doesn't seem unreasonable, Bernick said. Eloria was divided for a reason, Barak said. A certain thing had to be protected, and the division of Eloria was the best way to do that. Is this thing so important? Bernick asked. It's the most important thing in the world, Silk said. The bear cultists tend to forget that. Only, now it's been stolen, hasn't it? Garion blurted, as that dry voice in his mind informed him of the connection between Barak and Silk had just said, and the sudden disruption of his own life. It's this thing that Mr. Wolf is following. Barak glanced quickly at him. The lad is wiser than we thought, Silk, he said soberly. He's a clever boy, Silk agreed, and it's not hard to put it all together. His weasel face was grave. You're right, of course, Garion, he said. We don't know how yet, but somebody's managed to steal it. If Belgarath gives the word, the Aloran kings will take the world apart stone by stone to get it back. You mean war? Bernick said in a sinking voice. There are worse things than war, Barak said grimly. It might be a good opportunity to dispose of the Angarax once and for all. Let's hope that Belgarath can persuade the Aloran kings otherwise, Silk said. The thing has to be recovered, Barak insisted. Granted, Silk agreed, but there are other ways, and I hardly think a public street's the place to discuss our alternatives. Barak looked around quickly, his eyes narrowing. They had by then reached the harbor, where the masts of the ships of Turek rose as thickly as trees in a forest. They crossed an icy bridge over a frozen stream and came to several large yards where the skeletons of ships lay in the snow. A limping man in a leather smock came from a low stone building in the center of one of the yards and stood watching their approach. Oh, Krendig, Barak called. Oh, Barak, the man in the leather smock replied. How's the work go? Barak asked. Slowly in this season, Krendig said. It's not a good time to work with wood. My artisans are fashioning the fittings and sawing the boards, but we won't be able to do much more until spring. You're back, you can see? Wonderful, Jam Jam. That means you won't miss out on... Oh, kidding. Barak nodded and walked over to lay his hand on the new wood of the ship prow, rising out of the snow. Prendick is building this for me, he said, patting the prow. She'll be the finest ship afloat. If your oarsmen are strong enough to move her, Prendick said, she'll be very big, Barak, and very heavy. Saw what? I don't know what you're talking about. Then I'll man her with big men, Barak said, still gazing at the ribs of his ship. Hey, Vi. Good to see you. Welcome in. Oh, no. Now I'm getting licked. Sorry you're late. Your city's on fire, so I've heard. I hope you're in a safe place, Vi. That fire is going to be spreading, and soon I'm going to see the clouds myself. Yeah, LA's burning up to a crisp right now. It's pretty bad. Arian heard a gleeful shout from the hillside above the shipyard and looked up quickly. You're safe? You have bags packed in case? That's good. It's always good to be prepared. No worries. I've got a mountain between you and me. I'll be perfectly fine. But you need to stay safe. I'm glad you're prepared. Nah, I won't cross over. It's okay. That's true. Oh no, it's actually on fire. Like, it's bad. It's so bad. Like, we're bantering about it, because it's not the first time. But this one's pretty bad. Garion heard a gleeful shout from the hillside above the shipyard and looked up quickly. Several young people were sliding down the hill on smooth planks. Of course. And for everyone that doesn't know, we're currently on chapter 14 of the book titled Pawn of Prophecy by David Eddings, the first book in a series of 5, and my very favorite series. Thank you, Jam Jam. Looks like the emo didn't make it through, though. It was obvious that Barak and the others were going to spend most of the rest of the afternoon discussing the ship. While that might be all very interesting, Garion realized that he hadn't spoken with anyone his own age for a long time. It is the thought that counts, you are correct. And the type that counts, yeah. He drifted away from the others and stood at the foot of the hill, watching. One blonde girl in particular attracted his eye. In some ways, she reminded him of Zubret, but there were some differences. Where Zubret had been petite, this girl was as big as a boy, though she was noticeably not a boy. Her laughter rang out merrily, and her cheeks were pink in the cold afternoon air as she slid down the hill with her long braids flying behind her. That looks like fun, Garion said as her improvised sled came to rest nearby. Would you like to try? She asked, getting up and brushing the snow from her woolen dress. What's with the licking? I don't have a sled, he told her. I might let you use mine, she said, looking at him archly. If you give me something. What would you want me to give you? He asked. I'll think of something, she said, eyeing him boldly. What's your name? Arian, he said. What an odd name. Do you come from here? No, I'm from Sandaria. A Sandar? Truly? Her blue eyes twinkled. I've never met a Sandar before. My name is Maidie. Arian inclined his head slightly. Do you want to use my sled? Maidie asked. I might like to try it, Garion said. I might let you, she said, for a kiss. Garion blushed furiously, and Maidie laughed. A large, red-haired boy in a long tunic slid to a stop nearby and rose with a menacing look on his face. Maidie, come away from there, he ordered. What if I don't want to? She asked. The red-haired boy swaggered toward Garion. What are you doing here? He demanded. I was talking with Maidie, Garion said. Thank you, Natalia. Why are they all flirting with him? Protagonist syndrome. I mean, the other person that was flirting with Durnick, the smith. This is actually a girl flirting with Garion. Our young boy. Yeah, teenager. I was talking with Maidie, Garion said. Who gave you permission? The red-haired boy asked. He was a bit taller than Garion and somewhat heavier. I didn't bother to ask permission, Garion said. The red-haired boy glowered, flexing his muscles threateningly. I can thrash you if I like, he announced. Second flirt of the day. I mean, yeah. And there's also the woman in the windowsill. Don't forget her. Listen, it gets very, very cold in Chirac, and sometimes things can pass the time. Yeah, it's 3. And it's 1, 2. Are the women in the window? Gotta look out sometimes, I guess. Garion realized that the redhead was feeling belligerent and that a fight was inevitable. Why wouldn't there be women in the windows? Hi, Kate. Good to see you. Welcome in. There. Plenty more story to read. Girlies like to keep their secrets. Fine then. Keep your secrets. Garion realized that the redhead was feeling belligerent and that a fight was inevitable. The preliminaries, threats, insults, and the like would probably go on for several more minutes, but the fight would take place as soon as the boy in the long tunic had worked himself up to it. Garion decided not to wait. He doubled his fist and punched the larger boy in the nose. The blow was a good one, and the redhead stumbled back and sat down heavily in the snow. He raised one hand to his nose and brought it away bright red. He raised one hand to his nose and brought it away bright red. "It's bleeding," he wailed accusingly. "You made my nose bleed." "It'll stop in a few minutes," Garion said. "What if it doesn't?" "Nosebleeds don't last forever," Garion told him. "Why'd you hit me?" the redhead demanded tearfully, wiping his nose. "I didn't do anything to you." "You were going to," Garion said. "Put snow on it and don't be such a baby." "It's still bleeding," the boy said. "Put snow on it," Garion said again. "What if it doesn't stop bleeding?" "Then you'll probably bleed to death," Garion said in a heartless tone. "Nosebleeds are the worst, it's true. I never liked getting nosebleeds." It was a trick he had learned from Aunt Pole. It worked as well on the Trek boy as it had on Darun and Runderig. The redhead blinked at him, and then took a large handful of snow and held it to his nose. "Are all Sendars so cruel?" Mady asked. "I don't know all the people in Sindaria," Garion said. The affair hadn't turned out well at all, and regretfully, he turned and started back to the shipyard. "Had to go to the hospital for yours? Ah, that's scary, Jam Jam." "Garion, wait," Mady said. She ran after him and caught him by the arm. "You forgot my kiss," she said, threw her arms around his neck and kissed him soundly on the lips. "There," she said, and she turned and ran laughing back up the hill, her blonde braids flying behind her. Barak, Silk, and Durnik were all laughing when he returned to where they stood. Whore. There. "You were supposed to chase her," Barak said. "What for?" Garion asked, flushing at their laughter. "She wanted you to catch her." "I don't understand." "Barak," Silk said, "I think one of us is going to have to inform Lady Pulgara that our Garion needs some further education." "You're skilled with words, Silk," Barak said. "I'm sure you want to be the one to tell her." "Why don't we throw dice for the privilege?" Silk suggested. "Hi, Luxie. Good to see you." "Welcome in. And I hope you're doing well." "I've seen you throw dice before, Silk," Barak laughed. "Of course. We could simply stay here a while longer," Silk said slyly. "I rather imagine that Garion's new playmate would be quite happy to complete his education, and that way we wouldn't have to bother Lady Pulgara about it." Garion's ears were flaming. "Not as stupid as all that," he said hotly. "I know what you're talking about, and you don't have to say anything to Aunt Pole about it." He stamped away angrily, kicking at the snow. After Barak had talked for a while longer with his shipbuilder, and the harbor had begun to darken with the approach of evening, they started back toward the palace. Garion sulked along behind, still offended by their laughter. The clouds which had hung overhead since their arrival in Valaloran had begun to tatter, and patches of clear sky began to appear. Here and there, single stars twinkled as evening slowly settled in the snowy streets. The soft light of candles began to glow in the windows of the houses, and the few people left in the streets hurried to get home before dark. Garion, still loitering behind, saw two men entering a wide door beneath a crude sign depicting a cluster of grapes. One of them was the sandy-bearded man in the green cloak he had seen in the palace the night before. The other man wore a dark hood, and Garion felt a familiar tingle of recognition, even though he couldn't see the hooded man's face. There was no need for that. They had looked at each other too often for there to be any doubt. Nom nom. As always before, Garion felt that peculiar restraint, almost like a ghostly finger touching his lips. Hey, Ujan. The hooded man was Asherak, and, though the Murgo's presence here was very important, it was for some reason impossible for Garion to speak of it. He watched the two men only for a moment, then hurried to catch up with his friends. He struggled with the compulsion that froze his tongue, and tried another approach. Varek, he asked, are there many Murgos in Balalord? There aren't any Murgos in Chirek, Varek said. Angareks aren't allowed in the kingdom on pain of death. It's our oldest law. It was laid down by old Chirek Bareshoulders himself. Why do you ask? You're welcome, Kate. I was just wondering, Garion said lamely. His mind shrieked with the need to tell them about Asherak, but his lips stayed frozen. That evening, when they were all seated at the long table in King Anheg's central hall with a great feast set before them, Varek entertained them with a broadly exaggerated account of Garion's encounter with the young people on the hillside. I get to be a little extra for this. A great blow it was, he said in expansive tones, worthy of the mightiest warrior, and truly struck upon the nose of the foe. The bright blood flew, and the enemy was dismayed and overcome. Like a hero, Garion stood over the vanquished, and, like a true hero, did not boast nor taunt his fallen opponent, but offered instead advice for quelling that crimson flood. With simple dignity then, he quit the field, but the bright-eyed maid would not let him depart unrewarded for his valor. Hastily she pursued him and fondly clasped her snowy arms about his neck, and there she lovingly bestowed that single kiss that is the true hero's greatest reward. Her eyes flamed with admiration, and her chaste bosom heaved with newly awakened passion. But modest Garion innocently departed, and tarried not to claim those other sweet rewards the gentle maid's fond demeanor so clearly offered. And thus the adventure ended with our hero tasting victory, but tenderly declining victory's true compensation. What do you mean you're gonna cry? What's wrong, Core? The warriors and king. You love this stuff. Oh, good. The warriors and kings at the long table roared with laughter and pounded the table and their knees at each other's backs in their glee. Queen Lena and Queen Silart smiled tolerantly, and Queen Porine laughed openly. There, it'll happen someday. You're young, after all. Lady Merrill, however, remained stony-faced, her expression faintly contemptuous as she looked at her husband. Varian sat with his face aflame, his ears besieged with shouted suggestions and advice. Wait. Is that really the way it happened, nephew? King Rodar demanded of Silk, wiping tears from his eyes. More or less, Silk replied. Lord Barak's telling was masterly, though a good deal embellished. We should send for a minstrel, the Earl of Selene said. This exploit should be immortalized in song. Kiss seems gross, TBH. I think it depends on who. Jack ASMR, he doesn't make a lot of noise, though. Because let me tell you, being kissed by a partner is one of the greatest feelings in the world. Being randomly kissed, though, that is gross. Consent is the most important thing. Don't tease him, Queen Perrine said, looking sympathetically at Garion. And Pole did not seem amused. Her eyes were cold as she looked at Barak. Isn't it odd that 3 grown men can't keep one boy out of trouble? She asked. There's only one, protested, and only one kiss after all. My connection. Are we good? Hello? Okay. Oh no. You can see. You can see YouTube chat disconnected for me and came back. Yeah, we're good, we're okay. I don't think it was that bad. Hello. Hi. Everything's fine, everything's okay. No, it's fine. YouTube chat's back. Look, there's Kate. Sort of a germaphobe, not that much extreme though. Reminds me of my old boss, honestly. He was also a germaphobe, but for some reason he was cool with me. One day I had left the museum. He did give me a hug goodbye, which is rare. He never hugs anyone. I got one, though. Alright, back to the book. And Pole did not seem amused. Her eyes were cold as she looked at Barak. Isn't it odd that 3 grown men can't keep one boy out of trouble? She asked with a raised eyebrow. I mean, that's potentially the case. You have a fear of spiders? That's fair. Hugs are eh? That's true, not swap and spit or anything. It was only one blow, my lady, Silk protested, and only one kiss after all. Really, she said, and what's it going to be next time? A duel with swords, perhaps, and even greater foolishness afterward? There was no real harm in it, Mistress Pole, Durnick assured her. And Pole shook her head. I thought you at least had good sense, Durnick, she said, but now I see that I was wrong. Garion suddenly resented her remarks. It seemed that no matter what he did, she was ready to take it in the worst possible light. His resentment flared to the verge of open rebellion. What right had she to say anything about what he did? There was no tie between them after all, and he could do anything he wanted without her permission if he felt like it. He glared at her in sullen anger. She caught the look and returned it with a cool expression that seemed almost to challenge him. Well? She asked. Nothing, he said shortly. And that is the end of chapter 14. There's a slight hiccup there in terms of connection, but that is another chapter down. Can you believe that there are only 50 more pages left, and then this book is done. Yeah. Oh, what fun. However, yeah. I mean, the books themselves, they're not really that big. Or I guess not that long. How short? Let's see, so this book itself is 264 pages. Let's see. After that, Queen of Sorcery is not telling me how many pages it is. So, yeah. Yeah, no, like 264? If I were just reading on my own, I would devour that in like less than a day. And then move on to the next one. And devour that one too. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. Anyways. So, devouring pages on a book, Mushroom. Hi. Good to see you. Good evening and welcome. So, my question for you now is, shall I continue with this book, get it finished, out of the way, or do a different one? After all, we still have our other choices and options. Right now over Discord, someone is complaining at me about where I put the nether portal in my server. And then they're complaining about the spawn, and all I can say is, smile. How about I choose? We seem to be enjoying this. We're having fun. Let's do one more chapter and then end it there for the night. After all, things are about to get much more crazy. You on to page 200 in Iron Flame and it's getting crazy? Oh yeah. Especially because it's book 2. It goes nuts. Chapter... What more? Alright, we'll see. We'll get there. Chapter 15. The next morning dawned bright and crisp. The sky was a deep blue, and the sunlight was dazzling on the white mountain tops that rose behind the city. After breakfast, Mr. Wolf announced that he and Aunt Pole would again meet privately that day with Fulrak and the Alorn Kings. Good idea, Fulrak said. Gloomy ponderings are good for kings. Still need to finish Call Me By Your Name? What's that about? Unless one has regal obligations, however, it's much too fine a day to be wasted indoors. He grinned mockingly at his cousin. There's a streak of cruelty in you that I hadn't suspected, Barak, King Anheg said, glancing longingly out a nearby window. Do the wild boars still come down to the edges of the forest? Borak asked. In droves, Anheg replied, even more disconsolately. That's a tough word. A romance that gets spicy? Nice. I thought I might gather a few good men and go out and see if we can thin their numbers a bit, Borak said, his grin even wider now. I was sure you had something like that in mind, Anheg said moodily, scratching his unkempt hair. I'm doing you a service, Anheg, Borak said. You don't want your kingdom overrun with the beasts, do you? Rodar, the fat king of Drasnia, laughed hugely. I'm sorry, that description got me. Sorry. Oh. Anyways. Rodar, the fat king of Drasnia, laughed hugely. I think he's got you, Anheg, he said. He usually does, Anheg agreed sourly. I gotta laugh smally. He usually does, Anheg agreed sourly. I gladly leave such activities to younger and leaner men, Rodar said. He slapped his vast paunch with both hands. I don't mind a good supper, but I'd rather not have to fight with it first. I make too good a target. The blindest boar in the world wouldn't have much trouble finding me. Well, Silk, Borak said, what do you say? You're not serious, Silk said. Is it an anime? Nope, looks like it's just a different kind of a kid book, apparently, according to Kate. So that's fun. You must go along, Prince Keldar, Queen Porine insisted. Someone has to represent the honor of Drasnia in this venture. Silk's face looked pained. You can be my champion, she said, her eyes sparkling. Have you been reading Orendish epics again, Your Highness? Silk asked acidly. Catch up with the bear? Thank you for the raid. Welcome in. Hello, hello. And hey, thanks for following too, Catch Up. Catch Up the bear. Oh, did we just hit 100? Hi, welcome in. What were you up to? How was your stream? Dang, yeah, no, we just hit the goal. Thank you very much for raiding and getting us right there to 100 followers. Goodness gracious. Also, hello. My name is Cassian Radley. Beginner ASMRtist, occasional variety streamer, bringer of lots of joy and comfort. You know, Ketchup, he's so sweet? I mean, that fits for the name. Thank you, everyone. No, really, thank you, everyone. Wouldn't be here without you all. You know that. But hey, we appreciate a good catch-up raid. Stop the sappy stuff? Never. Ah, you were doing some ASMR too? Nice. Did some sleepy rambling and read some Wikipedia articles. Ooh. Read one for the Island of Dr. Moreau and Impossible Creatures. Ooh. That sounds like a lot of fun. I'm glad it sounded like you had a great stream. Right now, you've caught me in the middle of reading one of the books in my favorite series. We're on book 1, The Pot of Prophecy, although we are on chapter 15. Not much left in this book, honestly, but I think we've been having fun with it so far. Reading wiki articles does sound like fun, though. So hey, welcome in everyone. Hope you get nice and cozy, and welcome in. And of course, if you need to get some rest, then yeah, feel free to lurk, hang out, or do whatever. I'm here. You read one for brontosauruses a few weeks ago and it took you over an hour? That sounds like fun. I want to learn about brontosauruses. Screw this book. I'm just kidding, don't screw the book. Brontosaurus. On Wikipedia. Oh, that is long. You grab the wrong dark chocolate at 85%. Oh, that's rough. I think that would probably kill me. It's a really good one, though. I'll definitely take you up on that one. I love dinosaurs. They've always been so cool. That might be a fun day. A mix of Wikipedia articles and maybe reading recipes as well. That's always fun. Are your favorite? Nice. Sounds good, Mushroom. I hope you sleep well and have sweet dreams. See you next time. Alright. Well, now that we've had our hellos, and now that I know what I'll be doing soon, thank you, Ketchup, let's go ahead and get right back to the book. Have you been reading Horrendish epics again, Your Highness? Silk asked acidly. Consider it a royal command, she said. Some fresh air and exercise won't hurt you. You're starting to look dyspeptic. Silk bowed ironically. As you wish, Your Highness, he said. I suppose that if things get out of hand, I can always climb a tree. How about you, Turnic? Barak asked. I don't know much about hunting, friend Barak, Turnic said doubtfully, but I'll come along if you like. My lord? Barak asked the Earl of Selene politely. Oh, no, Lord Barak, Selene laughed. I outgrew my enthusiasm for such sport years ago. Thanks for the invitation, however. Hetar? Barak asked the rangy Algar. Hetar glanced quickly at his father. Go along, Hetar, Shohag said in a soft voice. I'm sure King Anheg will lend me a warrior to help me walk. I'll do it myself, Shohag, Anheg said. I've carried heavier burdens. I'll go with you then, Lord Barak, Hetar said, and thanks for asking me. His voice was deep and resonant, but very soft, much like that of his father. Well, lad? Barak asked Garion. Have you lost your wits entirely, Barak? Aunt Pole snapped. Didn't you get him into enough trouble yesterday? That was the final straw. The sudden elation he'd felt at Barak's invitation turned to anger. Arian gritted his teeth and threw away all caution. No worries, Ketchup. Thank you for the raid and the follow. You get some rest, okay? Sleep well, and great job with your stream. And we always appreciate the lurk. Rest easy. I know, Wampus is everywhere. Very lovely, too. Wampus is here on Twitch. They're on YouTube. Yeah, and I hope the food is tasty. Me? Lovely? Nah. Yep, there's Wampus. That was the final straw. The sudden elation he'd felt at Barak's invitation turned to anger. Arian gritted his teeth and threw away all caution. If Barak doesn't think I'll just be in the way, I'll be glad to go along, he announced defiantly. And Pole stared at him, her eyes suddenly very hard. Kate. Your cub's growing teeth, Pole, Mr. Wolf chuckled. Be still, father, Aunt Pole said, still glaring at Garion. Not this time, miss, the old man said with a hint of iron in his voice. He's made his decision, and you're not going to humiliate him by unmaking it for him. Garion isn't a child now. You may not have noticed, but he's almost man-high and filling out now. He'll soon be 15, Pole. You're going to have to relax your grip sometime, and now's as good a time as any to start treating him like a man. She looked at him for a moment. Whatever you say, father, she said at last with deceptive meekness. I'm sure we'll want to discuss this later, though. In private. Mr. Wolf winced. Aunt Pole looked at Gary and then, Try to be careful, dear, she said, and when you come back, we'll have a nice long talk, won't we? Will my lord require my aid in arming himself for the hunt? Lady Merrill asked in the stilted and insulting manner she always assumed with Barak. That won't be necessary, Merrill, Barak said. I would not neglect any of my duties, she said. Leave it alone, Merrill, Barak said. You've made your point. Have I my lord's permission then to withdraw? She asked. You have, he said shortly. Perhaps you ladies would like to join me, Winnieslina said. We'll cast auguries and see if we can predict the outcome of the hunt. Queen Porine, who stood somewhat behind the Queen of Tarek, rolled her eyes upward in resignation. Queen Sylar smiled at her. Let's go then, Barak said. The boars are waiting. Sharpening their tusks, no doubt, Silk said. Interrupting for a quick moment. I've really grown to like boars and pigs over time. Like, I always liked Pumbaa from The Lion King, of course, but then I played IDV, Good Old Identity 5. And Wildling was just so much fun, being the boar rider, making so many hunters mad, saving so many people, always getting max points every time. Boars are friends, so are bears, and wolves, and all manner of natural creature. Just be careful, IRL, though. Barak led them down to the red door of the armory, where they were joined by a grizzled man with enormously broad shoulders, who wore a bull-hide shirt with metal plates sewn on it. Wolves are pog. Yes. This is Torvik, Barak announced the grizzled man, Anheg's chief huntsman. He knows every boar in the forest by his first name. My Lord Barak is overkind, Torvik said, bowing. How does one go about this hunting of boars, friend Torvik? Vernick asked politely. I've never done it before. It's a simple thing, Torvik explained. I take my huntsmen into the forest, and we drive the beasts with noise and shouting. You and the other hunters wait for them with these. He gestured at a rack of stout, broad-headed boar spears. When the boar sees you standing in his way, he charges you and tries to kill you with his tusks, but you instead will kill him with your spear. I see, Vernick said somewhat doubtfully. It doesn't sound very complicated. We wear male shirts, Sternick, Barak said. Our hunters are hardly ever injured seriously. Hardly ever has an uncomfortable ring of frequency to it, Barak, Silk said, fingering a male shirt hanging on a peg by the door. No sport is very entertaining without a certain element of risk, Barak shrugged, hefting a boar spear. Have you ever thought of throwing dice instead? Silk asked. Not with your dice, my friend, Barak laughed. They began pulling on male shirts, while Torvik's huntsmen carried several armloads of boar spears out to the sleighs waiting in the snowy courtyard of the palace. Garyon found the male shirt heavy and more than a little uncomfortable. The steel rings dug at his skin even through his heavy clothes, and every time he tried to shift his posture to relieve the pressure of one of them, a half-dozen others bit at him. The air was very cold as they climbed into the sleighs, and the usual fur robes seemed hardly adequate. They drove through the narrow, twisting streets of Alalorn toward the Great West Gate on the opposite side of the city from the harbor. The breath of the horses steamed in the icy air as they rode. A ragged old blind woman from the temple stepped from a doorway as they passed in the bright morning sun. "Hail, Lord Barak," she croaked. "Thy doom is at hand. Thou shalt taste of it before this day's sun finds its bed." Without a word, Barak rose in his sleigh, took up a boar spear, and cast it with deadly accuracy full at the old woman. With surprising speed, the witch woman swung her staff and knocked the spear aside in midair. "It will avail thee not to try to kill old Marty," she laughed scornfully. "Thy spear shall not find her, neither shall thy sword. Go thou, Barak, thy doom awaits thee." And then she turned toward the sleigh, in which Garyon sat beside the startled Durnick. "Hail, Lord of Lords," she intoned. "Thy peril this day shall be great, but thou shalt survive it, and it is thy peril which shall reveal the mark of the beast, which is the doom of thy friend Barak." And then she bowed and scampered away before Barak could lay his hands on another spear. "Was that about Garyon?" Vernick asked, his eyes still surprised. "Barak says she's a crazy old blind woman," Garyon said. "She stopped us when we arrived in Balalorn after you and the others had already passed." "What was all that talk about doom?" Vernick asked with a shudder. "I don't know," Garyon said. "Barak wouldn't explain it." "It's a bad omen so early in the day," Vernick said. "These Chireks are a strange people." Garyon nodded in agreement. Can we just say, how cool but also terrifying it would be to see an old woman literally knock a spear out of the air with her cane. Like, that's some next level stuff right there. Beyond the west gate of the city were open fields, sparkling white in the full glare of the morning sun. They crossed the fields towards the dark edge of the forest 2 leagues away, with great plumes of powdery snow flying out behind their racing sleighs. She on some tough type stuff. Farmsteads lay muffled in snow along their track. The buildings were all made of logs and had high-peaked wooden roofs. These people seem to be indifferent to danger, Dernick said. I certainly wouldn't want to live in a wooden house, what with the possibility of fire and all. It's a different country after all, Garion said. We can't expect the whole world to live the way we do in Sandaria. I suppose not, Dernick sighed. But I'll tell you, Garion, I'm not very comfortable here. Some people just aren't meant for travel. Sometimes I wish we'd never left Falder's farm. I do too, sometimes, Garion admitted, looking at the towering mountains that seemed to rise directly out of the forest ahead. Someday, it'll be over though, and we'll be able to go home again. Dernick nodded and sighed once more. By the time they had entered the woods, Barak had regained his temper and his good spirits, and he set about placing the hunters as if nothing had happened. He led Garion through the calf-deep snow to a large tree some distance from a narrow sleigh track. This is a good place, he said. There's a game trail here, and the boars may use it to try to escape from the noise of Torvik and his huntsmen. When one comes, brace yourself and hold your spear with its point aimed at his chest. They don't see very well, and he'll run full into your spear before he even knows it's there. After that, it's probably best to jump behind a tree. Sometimes the spear makes them very angry. What if I miss? Garion asked. I wouldn't do that, Brack advised. It's not a very good idea. I didn't mean that I was going to do it on purpose, Garion said. Will he try to get away from me or what? Sometimes they'll try to run, Barak said. But I wouldn't count on it. More likely he'll try to split you up the middle with his tusks. At that point, it's usually a good idea to climb a tree. I'll remember that, Garion said. I won't be far away if you have trouble, Barak promised, handing Garion a pair of heavy spears. Then he trudged back to his sleigh, and they all galloped off, leaving Garion standing alone under the large oak tree. It was shadowy among the dark tree trunks, and bitingly cold. Garion walked around a bit through the snow, looking for the best place to await the boar. The trail Barak had pointed out was a beaten path, winding back through the dark brush, and Garion found the size of the tracks imprinted in the snow on the path alarmingly large. The oak tree, with low spreading limbs, began to look very inviting, but he dismissed the thought angrily. He was expecting to stand on the ground. He was expected to stand on the ground and meet the charge of the boar, and he decided that he would rather die than hide in a tree like a frightened child. A dry voice in his mind advised him that he spent far too much time worrying about things like that. Until he was grown, no one would consider him a man, so why should he go to all the trouble of trying to seem brave when it wouldn't do any good anyway? The forest was very quiet now, and the snow muffled all sounds. No bird sang, and there was only the occasional padded thump of snow sliding from overloaded branches to the earth beneath. Garion felt terribly alone. What was he doing here? What business had a good, sensible Sandarian boy here in the endless forests of Cherek, awaiting the charge of a savage wild pig with only a pair of unfamiliar spears for company? What had the pig ever done to him? He realized that he didn't even particularly like the taste of pork. He was some distance from the beaten forest track along which their sleighs had passed, and he set his back to the oak tree, shivered, and waited. He didn't realize how long he had been listening to the sound when he became fully aware of it. It was not the stamping, squealing rush of a wild boar he had been expecting, but was, rather, the measured pace of several horses moving slowly along the snow-carpeted floor of the forest, and it was coming from behind him. Cautiously, he eased his face around the tree. 3 riders, muffled in furs, emerged from the woods on the far side of the sleigh-churned track. They stopped and sat waiting. 2 of them were bearded warriors, little different from dozens of others Garion had seen in King Anheg's palace. The 3rd man, however, had long, flaxen-colored hair and wore no beard. His face had the sullen, pampered look of a spoiled child, although he was a man of middle years, and he sat on his horse disdainfully, as if the company of the other 2 somehow offended him. After a time, the sound of another horse came from near the edge of the forest. Almost holding his breath, Garion waited. What's up, Core? What's up? Were you supposed to add something there? Is there an emote? Am I not seeing it? Okay. The other rider slowly approached the 3 who sat their horses in the snow at the edge of the trees. It was the sandy bearded man in the green cloak who Garion had seen creeping through the passageways of King Anheg's palace 2 nights before. Oh, I don't look disdainful. My lord, the green-cloaked man said deferentially as he joined the other 3. Where have you been? The flaxen-haired man demanded. Lord Barak took some of his guests on a boar hunt this morning. His route was the same as mine, and I didn't want to follow too closely. The nobleman grunted sourly. He saw them deeper in the wood, he said. Well, what have you heard? Very little, my lord. The kings are meeting with the old man and the woman in a guarded chamber. I can't get close enough to hear what they're saying. I'm paying you good gold to get close enough. I have to know what they're saying. Go back to the palace and work out a way to hear what they're talking about. I'll try, my lord, the green-cloaked man said, bowing somewhat stiffly. You'll do more than try, the flaxen-haired man snapped. As you wish, my lord, the other man said, starting to turn his horse. Wait, the nobleman commanded. Where are you able to meet our friend? Your friend, my lord, the other corrected with distaste. I met him, and we went to a tavern and talked a little. What did he say? Nothing very useful. His kind seldom do. Will he meet us as he said he would? He told me that he would. If you want to believe him, that's your affair. The nobleman ignored that. Who arrived with the king of the Sendars? The old man and the woman. Another old man, some Sendarian noble, I think. Lord Barak and a weasel-faced Raznian, and another Sendar, a commoner of some sort. That's all? Wasn't there a boy with them as well? The spy shrugged. I didn't think the boy was important, he said. He's there, then? In the palace? He is, my lord. An ordinary Sindarian boy of about 14, I judge. He seems to be some kind of servant to the woman. Very well. Go back to the palace and get close enough to that chamber to hear what the kings and the old man are saying. That may be very dangerous, my lord. It'll be more dangerous if you don't. Now go, before that ape Barak comes back and finds you loitering here. He whirled his horse and, followed by his 2 warriors, plunged back into the forest on the far side of the snowy track that wound among the dark trees. The man in the green cloak sat grimly, watching for a moment. Then he too turned his horse and rode back the way he had come. Hey, I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna take a small break. I'm gonna drink some water and have a little stretch. If you're not bundled up and resting, make sure you all do the same. Okay, be right back. Okay, everyone. Hi. I'm back. Hopefully, you were all able to get something to drink and have a little stretch. I know that my back popped quite a bit. Ah, good times. Alright, let's go ahead and get right back into it, shall we? Thank you, Cora. It's good to be back. Arian rose from his crouched position behind the tree. His hands were clenched so tightly around the shaft of his spear that they actually ached. This had gone entirely too far, he decided. The matter must be brought to someone's attention. And then, some way off in the snowy depths of the wood, he heard the sound of hunting horns and the steely clash of swords ringing rhythmically on shields. The huntsmen were coming, driving all the beasts of the forest before them. He heard a crackling in the bushes, and a great stag bounded into view, his eyes wild with fright and his antlers flaring above his head. With 3 huge leaps, he was gone. Arian trembled with excitement. Then there was a squealing rush, and a red-eyed sow plunged down the forest trail, followed by a half-dozen scampering piglets. Arian stepped behind his tree and let them pass. The next squeals were deeper and rang with less fright and with rage. It was the boar. Arian knew that before the beast even broke out of the heavy brush. When the boar appeared, Arian felt his heart quail. This was no fat, sleepy porker, but rather a savage, infuriated beast. The horrid tusks jutting up past the flaring snout were yellow, and bits of twig and bark clung to them, mute evidence that the boar would slash at anything in his path. Trees, bushes, or a Sindarian boy without sense enough to get out of his way. Then, a peculiar thing happened. As in the long-ago fight with Runderig, or in the scuffle with Brill's hirelings in the dark streets of Muros, Arian felt his blood begin to surge, and there was a wild ringing in his ears. He seemed to hear a defiant, shouted challenge, and could scarcely accept the fact that it came from his own throat. He suddenly realized that he was stepping into the middle of the trail and crouching with his spear braced and leveled at the massive beast. The boar charged, red-eyed and frothing from the mouth. With a deep-throated squeal of fury, he plunged at the waiting Arian. The powdery snow sprayed up from his churning hooves like foam from the prow of a ship. The snow crystals seemed to hang in the air, sparkling in a single ray of sunlight that chanced just there to reach the forest floor. The shock as the boar hit the spear was frightful, but Arian's aim was good. The broad-bladed spearhead penetrated the coarsely haired chest, and the white froth dripping from the boar's tusks suddenly became bloody foam. Arian felt himself driven back by the impact, his feet slipping out from under him. And then the shaft of his spear snapped like a dry twig, and the boar was on him. The first slashing, upward-ripping blow of the boar's tusks took Arian full in the stomach, and he felt the wind whoosh out of his lungs. The second slash caught his hip as he tried to roll, gasping, out of the way. His chainmail shirt deflected the tusks, saving him from being wounded, but the blows were stunning. The boar's third slash caught him in the back, and he was flung through the air and crashed into a tree. His eyes filled with shimmering light as his head banged against the rough bark. And then Barack was there. Roaring and charging through the snow. But somehow, it seemed not to be Barack. Garion's eyes, glazed from the shock of the blow to his head, looked uncomprehendingly at something that could not be true. It was Barack. There was no doubt about that. But it was also something else. Oddly, as if somehow occupying the same space as Barack, there was also a huge, hideous beast, hideous bear. The images of the two figures crashing through the snow were superimposed, their movements identical, as if in sharing the same space, they also shared the same thoughts. Huge arms grasped up the wriggling, mortally wounded boar and crushed in upon it. Bright blood fountained from the boar's mouth, and the shaggy half-man thing that seemed to be Barack and something else at the same time raised the dying pig and smashed it brutally to the ground. The man-thing lifted its awful face and roared in earth-shaking triumph as the light slid away from Garion's eyes, and he felt himself drifting down into the gray well of unconsciousness. There was no way of knowing how much time passed until he came to in the sleigh. Silk was applying a cloth filled with snow to the back of his neck as they flew across the glaring white fields toward Valalorn. "I see that you decided to live," Silk grinned at him. "Where's Barack?" Darian mumbled groggily. "In the sleigh behind us," Silk said, glancing back. "Is he all right?" "What could hurt Barack?" Silk asked. "I mean, does he seem like himself?" The boar basically flung him into a tree, and he hit his head hard against it. So, he was lasting a little bit, but then he passed out. "I mean, does he seem like himself?" "Seems like Barack to me," Silk shrugged. "No, boy, lie still. That wild pig may have cracked your ribs." He placed his hands on Garion's chest and gently held him down. "My boar," Garion demanded weakly. "Where is it?" "The huntsmen are bringing it," Silk said. "You'll get your triumphal entry. If I might suggest it, however, you should give some thought to the virtue of constructive cowardice. Minori Kanade, thank you for the follow, and welcome in. Good evening." Hope you're doing well. If I might suggest it, however, you should give some thought to the virtue of constructive cowardice. These instincts of yours could shorten your life. But Garion had already slipped back into unconsciousness. And then they were in the palace, and Barack was carrying him, and Aunt Pole was there, white-faced at the sight of all the blood. "It's not his," Barack assured her quickly. "He speared a boar, and it bled on him while they were tussling. I think the boy's all right. A little rap on the head is all." "Bring him," Aunt Pole said curtly, and led the way up the stairs toward Garion's room. Later, with his head and chest wrapped in the foul-tasting cup of Antpol's brewing, making him lightheaded and sleepy. Carrion lay in his bed, listening as Antpol finally turned on Barak. "You great overgrown dolt," she raged. "Do you see what all your foolishness has done?" "The lad's very brave," Barak said, his voice low and sunk in a kind of bleak melancholy. "Brave doesn't interest me," Antpol snapped. Then she stopped. "What's the matter with you?" she demanded. She reached out suddenly and put her hands on the sides of the huge man's head. She looked for a moment into his eyes and then slowly released him. "Oh," she said softly. "It finally happened, I see." "I couldn't control it, Polgara," Rock said in misery. "It'll be all right, Barak," she said, gently touching his bowed head. "It'll never be all right again," Barak said. "Get some sleep," she told him. "It won't seem so bad in the morning." The huge man turned and quietly left the room. Gary knew they were talking about the strange thing he had seen when Barak had rescued him from the boar, and he wanted to ask Antpol about it, but the bitter drink she had given him pulled him down into a deep and dreamless sleep before he could put the words together to ask the question. And that right there is the end of Chapter 15. We got a lot of reading done today, honestly. So everyone, I hope you all enjoyed and had a nice relaxing time tonight. But I do believe, we read 3 chapters tonight. That's a lot of progress. But yeah, I do believe this is where we shall part ways for tonight. But don't worry, I will be back tomorrow. Yeah, I'm glad to put your worries at ease, Vi. Glad to see that you haven't burned down yet. What am I doing tomorrow? Well, either we're going back into the dark and broody depths of Silent Hill 2, or we'll do more reading. Maybe we'll do both. But everyone, I hope you have a fantastic night and sweet dreams, and I'll see you tomorrow. I'll decide when I do that while I'm working. 4-hour stream? Yeah, we can do half Silent Hill, half reading. That'll work. But yeah, rest easy, take care, and to... And for the YouTube crowd, hope you find your way. For the Twitch crowd, ooh, I'm gonna send you towards Braver Cube, so you can get some proper ASMR in. Some nice tingles. Take care, everyone. Good night.